Hello, and welcome to this episode number 8 of the Savage Balance podcast, a weekly podcast. What have you got? You got some writing, you get some waffling, and you get some conversations all wrapped up in one nice, neat, tidy, presentable, and beautiful podcast, if I don't say so myself. I have said so, and I already regret it. How are you doing? How are you all? I hope you're well. I'm currently outside. I'm by my old primary school because there's a couple of goalposts and I'm going to kick a ball on this really chilly day. Full-on chilly this is. And then I'm going to go feed my aunt's cat who is in the house by themselves and let him be nourished and cuddle him for a little while. But hey, what have you got today? You've got rather fascinating and also, I think, very helpful conversation today. Today I'm talking with Simon Ranger. Simon Ranger is the founder of the Seaweed Health Foundation, which he set up in 2010. He created the Seagreens brand in 1997, setting a new standard in production of nutritious food seaweed in Europe for healthcare and food industry applications. They now sell Seagreens in over 12 countries to many brands, including Pucker Herbs, Waitrose, and Viridian. This is a very focused chat, really, about seaweed. Wait, what are you chatting about seaweed for? Well, because it turns out that seaweed is a hugely beneficial food that we could all include in our diets for better immune health. And God, I learned some stuff. This is a really fantastic conversation. We recorded it in the middle of this year, 2020, during the first lockdown. I'll tell you a little bit more about some stuff I thought afterwards. But just before that, I think it's worth mentioning that I recorded this back at that time for a program I do on Future Radio for Norwich called Future Vegan. So a lot of the conversation is framed in vegan terms. Actually, not a lot, but some of the conversation is certainly framed in vegan terms. But this is certainly not an exclusively vegan podcast. This is beneficial to people who are vegan and not vegan. So I don't want you to get put off by those things. Stick with it. It's really wonderful. So with that in mind, this is episode number 8, Seaweed with Simon Ranger. Cool. So I am here today. I'm joined by Simon Ranger. How are you today?
Very well indeed, thank you. And in sunny Sussex, enjoying the amazing, unusual weather.
Yeah, I can see the sun shining through onto you on this Skype recording. There's you're beaming. It's clear to see. So you say that many Brits may be deficient in immune-supporting vitamins. Could you expand a little bit on that for us?
Yeah, my angle is I'm founder of what's called the Seagreens project. It's been going 20 years now. And it was set up to get a little bit of the most nutritious wild seaweeds into the daily diet, but seaweeds that are grown around the British Isles and Nordic region. I started in Norway, and then about 2008 started harvesting in Scotland, and we're now in 5 different locations in the British Isles and Nordic region. And what interests me about seaweed also ties into the immune system. Within the sort of more general context of a good and healthy life and daily exercise and healthy eating, the current recommendation is that we should have adequate, particularly a group of vitamins, primarily the vitamins A to E, and folate, which is B9, and omega fatty acids. And then we also need, to maintain our immune system, we need lots of natural minerals and trace elements like copper, iodine, iron, magnesium, selenium, and zinc. And I personally would add others, which are perhaps more esoteric, such as germanium and gold and silver. These are long known to be antiviral and antibacterial agents. And the critical thing is that, these are all available in seaweed. They're all there in ocean vegetables, ocean seaweed. And they are micronutrients, which distinguishes them because they're required in the body in relatively small amounts, but they're required every day. And the reason for that is because they have to come from the diet, because they're not produced in the body. They're not manufactured in the body. So this issue of dietary micronutrients and immunity very much works together and is very important. And people may be deficient in micronutrients. And we know that sections of the population are for various reasons. But firstly, we obviously eat a lot of restricted diets, and that may be because we prefer to avoid allergens, or we prefer to avoid animal foods. We also eat a lot of manufactured, or what I call formulated foods. These are foods created by technicians. They're not always created for their nutritional balance and completeness, and there is a large deficiency of micronutrients in manufactured foods. When you compare that to natural whole foods, which seaweed is, of course, a natural whole food, these are very different things. And to get a balance of all the micronutrients into the daily diet requires a considerable variety of different foods and a very high nutritional quality. Many of the micronutrients are relatively delicate and can easily be destroyed in processing. They're denatured. The other thing is that a lot of even our vegetables, and that's important for vegans, are grown in media that are not even soil. Broadly speaking, then, in the last 50 years, we know that there is a deficiency in agricultural soils. A lot of vegetables are still grown in agricultural soils. Broadly speaking, we can say that in the last 50 years, meat and veg have lost about half their calcium, about half their iron, magnesium, copper, and zinc. These are these essential immunity micronutrients. And also the omega fats, the omega-3 fats, have declined in similar proportions. And those are things that are essential to drive not only the immune response, but to drive inflammation reduction. So it's that we find common population deficiencies, particularly in the micronutrients. And I'll give you a couple of examples. 75% in the population deficiencies in iodine, and especially in women, which is very important in childbearing. 80% in vitamin D, and 90% in women with folate, which is the B9. Now, seaweed, although it's a very unusual food, contains all these micronutrients. It's cheap and it's easy to get into the diet on a daily basis, and that's why I got interested in it.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Why is it, do you think, that people might be getting these deficiencies from? Where do you think that people are? Why do you think that people are not getting these things in their regular diets?
Well, I think as I said, the deficiency in minerals and in fatty acids tells the story of we've made this move towards highly processed foods. We've made the move away from agricultural soils that are properly re-nutrified or allowed to produce crops in a kind of rotational system that allows the earth time to recover. We're drawing out more than we're putting in. Then you've got on top of that the fact that people are, restricting their diets for all sorts of reasons, and you get what you get in the end is an imbalanced nutritional profile in the body, and that's what seaweed can do an enormous amount to restore. And the payback for that is that the immune system will then function properly. And I mean, I may say that when an immune system is functioning properly, it not only helps to not get the common cold, but there are two parts of the immune system. The better part, which is called the adaptive immune system, when it's working efficiently, will actually adapt to resist new strains of pathogens. So it learns from one experience and then adapts to face the next onslaught. So terribly, terribly important that we get these micronutrients.
Yes, definitely. And interestingly, coming from your place of from your interest in seaweed, I can imagine a lot of people not really having much interaction with seaweed, seeing it as part of sushi or seeing it in beaches and thinking that's...
Yeah.
What is it about seaweed specifically that, that people might not know about?
I think the great sort of probably the great thing to really get is that if our native seaweeds are produced to a really high nutritional quality, they'll maintain our health, and where you have even a reasonably varied daily diet. This is the critical thing. Even if you've got a reasonably varied daily diet and you're making an effort to get that, it'll consist largely still of land-grown and manufactured foods, and it will have nutrient gaps. And the most likely things that are missing are going to be the micronutrients, which are so essential to our health. And seaweed will, in tiny amounts, we're talking about a pinch, a couple of pinches, which is like a gram, no more than a couple of grams, a quarter of a teaspoon of dried, good quality, nutritious seaweed will put back those micronutrients into the daily diet. And so that's a very easy thing to do. And we are surrounded in the UK by some of the most nutritious seaweeds in the world. It's a paradox that we're just learning about this. It's not something that people readily would go out and use in their food every day. A lot of vegans do, as I know, because we have a lot of customers who do that. But I think that the thing that makes this easy is to imagine it's an ingredient rather than a plate of vegetables, like a plate of broccoli. It's something you put into. You can even put it into the broccoli. You can put a little bit of seaweed, a tiny amount of seaweed, into lots of things on a daily basis, and that's the way to do it. And as a result of that, the industry that we are developing is getting seaweed as ingredients into many foods, not just on the table. And people can go to the health store and buy Seagreens and sprinkle our culinary ingredient, or even take our capsules, vegan capsules. But I would like to see, as we're doing, working with manufacturers, especially manufacturers, because that's where the micronutrients are really needed, back into that food. And in an average weekly shopping basket, there should be a number of products, everyday foods, that contain a little bit of seaweed, and that is happening. And we're supplying a lot of those. That's the exciting bit.
That's fantastic. Yeah, working with those sorts of things. And I like the fact that it's incorporating it into what you're already doing, as opposed to, the idea of picking up some seaweed from the beach and sort of slurping down this sort of that it's the dried end.
I sort of have to say that we started this enterprise in Norway back in the late 90s, and then we worked in Scotland. Then we started in Scotland about 10 years later. And one of the critical things is, if you're going to go down to the sea today and you want to collect a good amount of seaweed for some food, you really want to know what's in it. I mean, this is not like you can't go back to the manufacturer and complain. So you absolutely have to test for not only nutrients, but contaminants and pollutants and allergens, and you really need to know. I mean, we spent a whole 2-year project and over £100,000 when we first did this, to make sure that what we're actually putting into food is kosher. It's really going to be good to eat. So it's not an easy thing to do. And okay, foraging is fine on a small scale, but if it's going to go into the food chain, human food chain, it's got to be of a very, very high quality. And in fact, we've worked very hard over the last few years, and with the Biodynamic Association, we've produced a thing called the Nutritious Food Standard, Nutritious Food Seaweed Standard, which requires now that the consumer can see the nutritional profile of the seaweed, and that's really, really important. And that's quite unlike any other standard. So we're organic. One can be organic and vegan, but you also need to know, quite scientifically what is the analysis of that seaweed that we're eating. And I think there are some wonderful seaweeds coming through from companies like Clearspring from the Far East, from Japan, the old traditional 1 or 2% they eat in every meal. But again, I think that in the West, our eating habits are different. And I see the future as being very much getting this little bit of seaweed into any old dish, any day, and getting into foods as an ingredient, as being the way forward. The other thing, if I may just add, we've talked about micronutrients and immunity, which work together very much and terribly important to each other. But we've researched seaweed over the past 10 years, particularly. And all the international research beyond that shows that the other big benefit is that there's everything in seaweeds that will help reduce the risk of chronic degenerative diseases. And that means cardiovascular and diabetes and type 2 diabetes and obesity and dementia. And all the studies that we've done on Seagreens concur with that. They're all going in that direction. So, a tiny amount of this stuff, it really is a superfood. And I hate the word superfood, but it is a superfood. Like, kale and all sorts of other things are superfoods. And these are the things that we should really concentrate on getting in, not just once a week, but every day. Every day the body needs these micronutrients, these minerals and richness, essential fatty acids, good quality.
Right. Do you see it taking on a role in the same way like kale has in say goji berries or turmeric, and the way it infiltrates the market as a superfood? Do you see it having its prominence in that way one day?
Yes, I do, and I know Sebastian Pol very well of Patra and his wonderful turmeric and all those sort of things, and I think we all agree that these are sadly these are not the things that the mainstream food manufacturers bother to put in our food, and yet these are exactly the things that you don't want to go out and eat turmeric, but to put a little turmeric in this and that, and to put a little seaweed in this and that. These are really little bombshells of nutrition that the S should be in what we eat every day. Yeah. Even in our drinks, so you can put seaweed in water. Actually, a little bit of seaweed powder in water. It tastes delicious, very refreshing. So terribly easy to do. And the other point about the immune thing is that we talk about is that we know there are these deficiencies. All the trials have been done. We know the knowledge is there. We know what people are deficient in. We know which sectors of the population are deficient in what. And it's therefore solvable. It's therefore people can do something about it. So that's the good news.
That's fantastic. When you're talking about ingesting it in small amounts as well, I imagine some people might have a vague idea of taste being something that might put them off in some way. But is there any kind of, does it have a strong taste, a strong sea taste? Or...
Well, yeah, that's a good point. And some do. We make we sell seaweed to Waitrose, and they put in a little pouch in the Waitrose Cooks Ingredients section, and it's a little pouch called Ruby Red Dulse, and dulse is a red seaweed. It's a lovely seaweed. It tastes wonderful, and it's got a very strong taste. It's actually not the most nutritious of the seaweeds, most of what we use and most of what we're using as ingredients are what we call the wild rack seaweeds. They're brown seaweeds. They're very common. They're very prolific. Tons of them, extremely sustainable, which Dulce is not. It is grossly over-harvested at the moment. Not by us, I might say. But these wild rack seaweeds, they're not particularly attractive, but actually they have very mild flavors. As I say, you can put a little bit of what we call knotted rack or channel rack. And the other one is bladder rack, which people are much more familiar with. It's a very, very traditional seaweed, bladder rack. We've got tons of it. And you put a little bit of that into just a glass of water. It's not an unpleasant taste. It's very clean. It's like imagine putting a little bit of sea into a glass. That's rather salty, but the seaweed isn't. It's not naturally salty. But it has a lovely taste. And you can put, I always say to people, the best way to understand, particularly Seagreens, which are our biggest native seaweeds, and that's what we focused on, of course. Put a little bit of what we call culinary ingredient. It's a pure knotted rack, ascophyllum. Put a spoonful into a bowl of soup. Preferably something like broccoli soup, which has got a pretty background taste, bland vegetable taste, and you see that come alive. It just brings out the flavors that are already there. It doesn't change the flavor.
Fantastic, that's really cool. Well, as this is a vegan show, a lot of the statistics that you pulled out about people's specific deficiencies in certain vitamins here and there. You can see how prolific they are across the whole of the country. But do you think that there are any specific essential vitamins that vegans should be specifically vigilant of, making sure they have enough of?
Any seaweed vegetables?
Or just, any vitamins in general that vegans might be lacking, particularly because of their diet, that they might not be aware of? Definitely, iodine comes into that category, and all of our seaweed, all of the Seagreen seaweed products, all of the species that we're harvesting around the coasts, they all have sufficient iodine to give a person iodine sufficiency, and that is particularly critical in anyone who's not eating meats or fish or dairy products and so on. But these recommendations, which cover vitamin A, B6, B12, B12 is in seaweed. It's not in any other kind of land-grown food. Okay. C, D, E, and folate, which is B9, and the omega fatty acids. These are all rich in seaweed, and all of these minerals and trace elements are particularly important as well, because, as I say, it doesn't. I'm sorry, but even on an organic farm, doesn't mean the soil is rich in trace elements. These are, we're talking about millions of years of agriculture and millions of years during which the rain doesn't replenish the earth with minerals. It's pure water. And we are, when we're bringing seaweed back from the ocean, which is the great pool, the great residual pool of nutrients and minerals, when we're bringing that back into our food, into the food chain, even through putting it in the garden and putting it under the soil and the plants, we're completing a natural cycle, which nature has a problem doing that herself. So it's a wonderful way of bringing that foundation of nutrition and metabolism back into the body, because that's what it's so needed for. Yeah, fantastic. What I like about talking to you and hearing this stuff is that there is sort of like it feels very in depth and complicated, and a lot of it, as interesting as it is, goes a bit over my head sometimes. But I like the fact that there is a solution out there which is very easy to understand, which is you take the recommended amount of how much, was it about a quarter teaspoon, you said?
Yeah. And, people are catching on. I mean, this is not mainstream yet anywhere, but nevertheless, there are already lots of foods out there. I mean, Clearspring makes a wonderful black pepper and seaweed oat cake using Seagreens wild rack seaweeds. There are some other things going on, like the Iceland frozen food chain. They've got a whole range of slimming meals or weight management meals, and that combines the ability of seaweed to replace salt and with the obesity and diabetes research that we've done. There are some wonderful companies like Pucker and Viridian, who are including a lot of seaweed in many of their products. I mean, certainly more than 10 products. So there are some good things going on, and we're supplying seaweed to bakeries in the UK and in Norway and in Germany, and they're putting that into the daily bread. Well, that's the sort of thing we should be using the daily bread for. What a wonderful way of distributing, some great nutrition.
It sounds like it's silently infiltrating the mainstream, sort of undercover.
Yes, and it's absolutely, totally
sneaking its way in. Cool. So, you say that sounds like there's quite a few places that people can get them from. Can they get them from you directly as well?
We don't at the moment. We don't compete at all with our retailers, but there's plenty of retailers out there and online. If they go to seagreens.co.uk /overview, particularly seagreens.co.uk is our website. And if they go /overview, that gives very good introduction with lots of links and sort of how to do it, where to get it, But otherwise, go to a local health store. Good health stores have Seagreens in, and they also have other seaweed products. But the great thing is, this daily use, a little bit every day is a lot once a week doesn't actually do it. So it may be nice to eat, but from a nutritional point of view, and that's what we focus on. It's a tiny little bit. It's a quarter of a teaspoon, as you say, or a couple of capsules, which are sunny food, and just get it in there at the base of the daily diet, so your body can properly metabolize, properly feed the various systems, including the immune system, and it keeps you up. I promise you. I've been doing it for 20 years, and I'm 70 this year. Actually, I just had my 70th birthday, and it's that little extra energy, it's that little extra balance that you really feel in your system. Eating good,
Yeah, that's so great to hear that it's such a small addition onto anyone's lifestyle in a way that you wouldn't even consider, and it helps maintain and manage such a huge part of your body.
Yeah, and therefore it's not expensive. It's a couple of pence or whatever a day. It's within virtually everybody's means.
That's another thing I was going to ask you about, actually, about the price and the cost, and in terms of incorporating it into low-income families. But if you say it's because it's such a small amount, it's barely noticeable, and a little goes a long way.
Well, yeah. I mean, for example, we produce a little jar of this thing called a culinary ingredient. It's just a a very, very highly quality produced dried seaweed. It's in a sort of ground. It's like a little ground. Looks like a ground pepper, really. It's that sort of consistency. I don't like powdered seaweeds because it can destroy the minerals. So small particles, yes, it's fine. And that stuff, it's like, I think it's $14.75 a jar. It will last for 3 months. It's a few quid a month. So pennies a day. And that's the sort of thing that is healthy and cheap, but it does a hell of a job inside the body.
Well, that's great. I really appreciate your time, and it's such a interesting and important message at this point of such high stress and anxiety during this pandemic. And it's fantastic to know that people can have a bit more autonomy about how to introduce and maintain these aspects of ourselves that maybe we struggle to maintain through picking out the right amounts of different things, knowing that this can look after all of it is fantastic. So I appreciate your time, and it's a fantastic message. And, I thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you so much, Dave. That's very, very good of you. Thanks very much indeed.
I really appreciate it. Cheers. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
So there we go. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you got something out of that. I certainly did. The thing I loved about this conversation the most is that for me, when it comes to vitamins, nutrients, micronutrients, this all gets very complicated and very confusing for me very quickly, and I'm very easily out of my depth. So the fact that there's a very practical solution that's so simple to enact, as in literally a pinch of high quality organic seaweed, can help balance and maintain all of those things, that is fantastic for me. As I mentioned before, this is not simply a vegan podcast. One of the things I remember most about it is him saying that meat and veg have lost a lot of meat and veg both in general have lost a lot of magnesium, iron, calcium, omega-3s, just a lot of immunity essential nutrients over the past 50 years. And so I think that's worth taking on board. If you like this from a vegan perspective, or even not really, there is a great conversation with Juliet Gallatley of episode 3 and 4 of this podcast, which gives you plenty more content really to do with pandemics and COVID, but there is certainly a vegan angle to that. Plus, there's plenty more vegan content coming, including something actually in the next couple of weeks, which I am very proud of, something I wrote, and I'm excited to share it, really. But seaweed is now part of my diet, though I have actually recently been very inconsistent with it, not doing what Simon said, so apologies, Simon, but re-listening to this has certainly reinvigorated me and reminded me to get back on it. There's also some links in the bio, including some Seagreens and where you can purchase them, so you may want to check that out. Hey, thank you very much for listening to this. Share this podcast with your friends. We have a social media, Instagram, Savage Balance Podcast, and Twitter at SavBalPod. There's an email address, savbalpod@gmail.com. You may be interested in writing some thoughts about this or any other of the content, or any content you might want in the future. Just get in touch. I'd love to hear from you. We have a website, which is savbalpod.com. There will be extra content coming about this conversation in the next few days. Subscribe, comment, rate and review. And I mean, it really means a lot to me. When I first started this, I thought, that's the thing that all podcasters say, but the more I do it, every time I get a little review or somebody says something, it means a lot more than I thought it would. So if you could do that, that would be great. The artwork is by Dolly Gray. The music is by Danny Tonks. Thank you very much again to Simon Ranger for his time. Thank you all for listening, and I will see you next week with something cool. As I said before in the intro, I'm going to kick a ball around, so I've got a ball here. Let's see if I can score. I've got quite a tight angle, but let's see what happens. Oh. Shocking. Open goal, and now my thigh really hurts. God, I'm not very good at this. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. I will see you again soon, I'm sure. Take it easy. See you later. Oh, my leg.